to their futures. Soldiers speak out. 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 Soldiers speak out.
Welcome to the Veterans Hour, a monthly production of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109, the Rachel Corrie chapter in Olympia, Washington. My name is Dennis Mills, and I'm one of the founding members of the Rachel Corrie chapter. We have a very special opportunity to learn about something that is fairly new for most of our listening and viewing audience, and that is the topic of conscientious objection. And I have the privilege tonight of having two people who have been very up close and personal with the term conscientious objection, or CO as we have it. And with us tonight is Nicole Michell, a recent veteran from Iraq and a conscientious objector, CO. And Glen Anderson, who has had quite a little history, probably going back to the Vietnam days, of being quite familiar with what conscientious objection is. And so tonight we're going to share basically our backgrounds with what conscientious objection is and how does one become one and just the different processes of that. And I think I'm just going to start with you first, Glenn, because you and I go back to, well, there's a reason our hair is a certain color, but we go back to the time when conscientious objection was even part of a draft type of a thing, and you're familiar with that background, but it's changed, and Nicole is not part of that background. So bring us up to date. What is conscientious objection, its history, etc.?
Well, the interesting thing is that even though it's written into the United States law, and the criteria regarding the draft, and the criteria regarding getting out of the military from being in the service, the criteria are the same. But the basic sense of it really goes back for thousands of years, where people, just as part of the human condition, people have consciences, and their consciences will sometimes say, I can't do that. And it may be, I can't steal from this person whose store is unattended right now, or I can't cheat on somebody's spouse, or whatever. Conscience comes up all the time in daily life. And regarding war, there have been people going back for thousands of years who have realized their conscience will not let them participate in war. It could be because of a religious, an explicitly religious reason, or just that sense deep within one's heart where you know this is just not right, I can't do this because my conscience won't let me. So it's been written into the law. In World War I, it was scarcely used. People who were conscientious objectors did not have legal protection, and they were in prison, and they were treated really brutally. When the draft for World War II was coming along, actually before World War II started in the United States, the 1940 law that created the draft before Pearl Harbor had written into it a provision for conscientious objection. And peace folks had been working in the 1930s for that. And that law still basically is what it's about, and then it was changed in the late 40s, and that law really has persisted. And the basic criteria are the same, and procedures may have changed, of course. But the basic sense of it is that because of what they call religious training and belief, which need not be actually religious in a conventional sense, the person cannot participate in war. And there's a special variation that we can talk about where some people say, well, I could serve in the military as long as I don't have to deal with the weapons. And there's a special provision for that. And you can be either one kind or the other of conscientious objector.
Now, back during the Vietnam days, most of the people wanting to get CO status normally had to come from a religious basis and often a historic peace church.
Yeah, one of the things that happened early on was that where Quakers, who are well known as peace-oriented, and two Christian denominations, the Brethren and the Mennonites.
Yes.
It was very common for people there to be conscientious objectors. Not all of them were, but a great number. There were also people who came out of other backgrounds. They could be Methodist or Episcopalian or whatever. At that time, there weren't that many people of really unconventional beliefs. There weren't that many Buddhists, for example, or others. But as things went on, and especially during the Vietnam era, things opened up where it became much easier for people who had either different beliefs or beliefs that might be considered very, very different to be accepted. And there were some U.S. Supreme Court cases, one in the mid-60s and one in about 71 or 72, that broadened out the definition through case law at the Supreme Court level, even though the statute, the actual law passed by Congress, remained the same. So that's one of the things that we have to deal with if somebody is considering becoming a conscientious objector. It's the law as it's written doesn't actually mean what the actual words say because it's been interpreted by the courts, and we can help people understand.
Now they're looking for the term, and I hear this sincerity.
Yeah.
Sincerity of deeply held convictions, religious, moral, and ethical. Those are terms that we often hear about.
Right, and the basic sense of it is that you have to have the kind of beliefs that qualify, which are beliefs that prohibit you from participating in war, or in the case of the other variety, participating in weapons in the military. So you have to not be allowed by your conscience, by your religious beliefs, or by your moral, deeply held moral beliefs for that, and you have to be sincere in holding them. So you got to have the kind of beliefs that qualify, and you have to be sincere. So you got to qualify on both counts. And something as complex as a person's beliefs leave a lot of uncertainty, and so it's hard for somebody to pass judgment on someone else and say, well, you're not sincere, or you don't believe this, or you do, and so it's inherently fraught with difficulties. But people can prevail, and Nicole is a great example of somebody who prevailed.
And Nicole, you recently had to go through this test of sincerity of your deeply held one. First of all, why don't you tell our viewing audience a little bit about yourself and the fact that you enlisted in the Army and you had a tour in Iraq. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was that you did, and then how you came to change your beliefs. What happened that moved you to file for conscientious objector?
Well, I joined the Army in 2005, about a year after I got out of high school. And just a few months before actually I left to join the Army, I was introduced to a Buddhist monastery in Houston called the Chung Tai Zen Center of Houston, and attended some meditation classes. So when I joined, actually, and I was asked what my religion was, I called myself a Buddhist for the first time. And upon entering basic training, I was really psyched. Like, I was ready to do everything I needed to do and be a super soldier, and things didn't really start occurring to me until they put a weapon in my hands, and I felt like something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was at the time.
That was even during your advanced training?
I did one station unit training. I enlisted to be a military police, so they do our basic, and then like you wake up one morning and then you're in AIT and you're training to be an MP. So there really wasn't much difference to me between AIT and basic training. It's all just one lump thing. But yeah, I started to just feel kind of funny with the weapon in my hands, And at first I thought that it was just because I was unfamiliar with weapons and I didn't want to accidentally injure myself or another trainee. But it persisted even as I became more used to the weapon itself and was sure that I wouldn't hurt somebody accidentally. The feelings persisted. So I decided to talk to some of my drill sergeants and to a chaplain about that, and they told me that a lot of people go through this and that it is likely just culture shock. If I just stick with it, like, I'll feel better. And
this is before you were deployed to Iraq.
no, I wasn't deployed. I was still in training at
You're
the
still
time.
in training, okay.
I was still in training at the time, and I very much wanted to be accepted by my leadership. So I took their advice and I just found ways to get through the training. And eventually I went to my first unit and nothing really got better. It was actually a very long struggle before I made my claim, but I didn't know about conscientious objection then. I had no idea that this existed. So to me, I thought that my problem was with the Army and with the Army lifestyle. So I had a lot of, I had a lot of problems with my command for that. And some of my leaders understood and would try to help me. There was a point where they tried to help me get out of the Army based on a failure to adapt. But I had gone like a few weeks past the number of days that you have to qualify for it. So they're just like, oh, well, I guess you're staying. I was like, okay, and what do I do now? And
So who introduced you to the concept then of conscientious objection? Obviously, it would not be your commanding officer, or would it?
No, actually, little rumors just trickled to me, particularly after I had an incident where I actually refused to fire my weapon at a range once. It was at a 9mm range. We were qualifying because we needed to do the law and order mission on post. So we all had to qualify on our pistols as part of that.
You were military police at that
I
time.
was military police, yeah. So we were qualifying for that purpose, and I shot horribly 2 times that day, and it was, I could not dehumanize the target. Like, it's a human-ish silhouette that we're shooting at, and given all of the buildup of what was happening, I could no longer dehumanize the target. So it was causing me to not want to hit it. So when a sergeant asked me, like, after you fail a qualification, they'll pull you aside and they'll say, well, you know, maybe you should do this or that, and they'll try to figure out what's wrong with your shot. And so after the second time I was asked, I was like, well, what do you think it is? And I told this sergeant, I was like, Sergeant, I think it's because I don't want to hit the target. It represents a human being, and I don't feel comfortable shooting at a human being. And that sergeant didn't really know what to do about it, so he went and got my officer, who talked to me a little bit. Like, she listened to what it was about, but didn't really listen to me. She was just like, well, you have to qualify. And there's no, inquiry about conscientious objection then. I ended up getting in big trouble. Well, not too big of trouble. I didn't lose rank or anything like that, but it was after that point that little rumors started trickling out to me that, about this conscientious objector thing. Like, but it was bad. It was always bad because they actually had a conscientious objector who had continued serving in the military in the same squad that I was in for the deployment they had been on before I was in the Army. And they spoke very ill of this person. They were a staff sergeant, and made their claim right before they deployed. So they were all like, oh, they're just afraid of combat. And that's the assumption when you're in the military and you talk about wanting to be a conscientious objector, is they think that you're avoiding combat or avoiding duty. And that's obviously what they thought of this person, and that's what I thought they would assume of me if I looked into making a claim. At that time, I got all of my information from my leaders and from other soldiers who I talked to, which I didn't really talk to off duty a whole lot. I wasn't particularly social after work. So I got all of my information about Army policy.
You came across Army Regulation 600-43 and became pretty familiar with that then?
No.
That's the regulation for conscientious objection.
I didn't know that there was a regulation for it. I didn't know that it was something that I could read. All I knew was that conscientious objection was somehow a bad thing, and even though it might be something that I need to do, I didn't want to because I was too concerned about what people thought of me. So it was a really, really difficult time while we were training up to go to Iraq. We trained for about a year, and I just, because I had to, like after I got in trouble and like continuously counseled and talked to, and I would get up and in the turret, they made me a gunner of all things, like even given all of that. But yeah, so they made me a gunner, and I'd be up there training, and then my team leader, squad leader, or some other sergeant would look up to me and be like, "You better pull that trigger, Mitchell." I won't say it on TV, but and just things like that all the time because they knew. In fact, when I finally qualified on my 9mm before, some sergeant passed me in the hall and was like, "I heard you became a killer today," and that it kind of triggered me a little bit when he said that, because that's not what I wanted to be, and I knew that. And so I remember I actually, that was one of the first times I actually kind of stood up for myself, besides refusing in the first place. But
So you were in country how long before then you started to file for an application?
okay, yeah, actually, when I deployed, I was in country for about 2 months. The first month was spent just like getting equipment and stuff, and then the second month we actually started going on missions, and people were concerned about me. The conversation was brought to me about, like, are you going to shoot somebody? And you know, that made me start really questioning it and thinking about things. When I was in the gun, I was in a particular vehicle, an ASV, where I would look out of a scope, and wherever I was looking, I had 2 weapons pointed at, basically, you know, 2 pretty destructive weapons, and I didn't feel comfortable even looking at people because of that. So that was compromising my ability to do my job because of these thoughts that I had. So one day I just I got word that I'd be going on mission the other day, and so this was about 2 months into the deployment. It was actually Christmas night that I sat down and really thought about what I was doing, and decided that the next day I would seek some information about conscientious objection. And then the next day there was some drama that went on. It's kind of a long story, but it was brought to me because I had told a friend what I had been thinking about, and he went and told my leaders, who came to me and said, you know, "Oh, I heard you want to be a conscientious objector." And so I had to go through this questioning process with them right then, where they would present all these which was not like an official part of the process, by the way. I don't want anybody to be confused about that. This was just my unit trying to get me to back down from my claim by presenting these hypothetical situations to me where, you know, they say like, well, if somebody was about to shoot your mother, like they'll pick somebody close to you, and the only way you could possibly stop it is by shooting them. Like they try to trap you. Because, and in that moment, like, you almost have to lie. Like, you don't really know what you're gonna do, but if I told them, yes, I would shoot the person, then they would have ignored me. I know they would have ignored me, so I just say no, 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 like, no matter what they said.
Even though they were presenting hypotheticals that were actually illegal, those are not what the law or the regulation requires. So they were setting, informally, they were setting a tougher standard. And trying to trap you, as you said, but those kinds of questions are actually not consistent with what the regulation
Absolutely,
says. Yeah.
absolutely.
And they either don't know, or else they're trying to jerk somebody around.
Oh no, they don't know. They don't
So-
know anything about the regulation. They just have their own ideas.
Right, and that's why it's important to know what the regulations are, and to get outside consultation, outside information, because they very often, and the same thing was true of draft boards. Draft boards commonly did that same kind of thing, and they were supposed to know, and they didn't know. I mean, it's just a pattern that goes back for decades.
Did you find out, Nicole, that there were two classifications for conscientious objector, 1O and 1AO? One is that 1AO is where you're reassigned a non-combatant role but remain in the service, and 1O is that you object to all forms of military service and are therefore discharged if you are granted. Was that ever explained to you?
It was a few days later. I went to legal, and they handed me a piece of the regulation. It's not a very big regulation itself. They gave me like the first 11 pages of it, which was like amazing to me. Like, I literally hugged it because I was so happy that I could actually read what it was and what I needed to do. So I found that out when I read through the regulation that they handed me, or the piece of the regulation that they handed me, and found that out. Yeah, so I ended up deciding to apply for 1AO to remain in the Army. My issue was that I did not want to kill. I could not kill.
So you did say, I'll go with 1AO rather than immediate discharge upon being classified CO.
Yes, that is what I chose to do.
And how did you demonstrate your sincerely held belief that started from the time just before you enlisted and then further grew throughout the training of advanced infantry training and then deployment in Iraq? How did that become stronger and became a sincerely held belief?
Well, I explained to, I wrote a summary. It was like an essay, like almost like a persuasive essay like they teach you how to do in school about my beliefs, just to explain them. And basically I told them what I just told you right now, with a little bit more detail in some areas. But that's exactly what I did. I just told them where I was coming from and what my beliefs were, and why I felt that way. And like, there was some other paperwork that, you know, gave them something to hold and look at and read to help, you know, be like, okay, well, this is what she's saying. And then I also went through a process of, I had an interview with a chaplain, which was understood for that particular interview not to be confidential, which normally, you know, when you speak to a chaplain, it is. But, you know, we established that before we talked, that the chaplain would be making a recommendation.
Right, and upon how sincere you are in your held beliefs.
Yes, absolutely. And then also I did a mental evaluation to make sure that I was sane enough
And
to
that was
make
with
a
a
claim.
psychiatrist who so that they would know that you were sane enough on making this decision?
I don't know if they were a psychologist or psychiatrist or any of that. I know it was like a captain somewhere who worked in behavioral health. But,
Well,
yeah.
then you went on also the third leg of that, because you do have the chaplain, and you do have the psychiatrist or mental health person. Then you have the commanding officer. You went before a commanding officer
No.
too? No.
They assign an investigating officer.
Okay.
It is not somebody who is in your chain of command.
All right.
An impartial person. They may be in your brigade or something like that, but you've never seen them before, and they've never seen you. And they look into all that paperwork. There was also a hearing, which was, I think, one of the most important pieces of my process. I don't know if everybody uses a hearing or actually gets their hearing. But mine went down almost like a little miniature court thing. We went in formally, it was recorded, they made a transcript of the whole thing. I had an attorney from JAG who was absolutely amazing. I did not expect to have a JAG attorney have my back like this person did, and it made a very big difference in helping me understand the things that I needed to establish. And one of the things that they're really concerned about when you're articulating your claim is timing. They want to know when you joined. They want to know when your beliefs made it so that you could not like, oh, I'm conflicted, but when could you just not do this anymore and like made your claim? Like, if you could tell them down to the second, like be like, okay, it was April 22nd at 10 p.m., like that's what they would want to know. So the timing is very, very important. It's crucial because what they're trying to see is if your beliefs were formed and crystallized before you entered the Army. If those were the beliefs you had before the Army and you joined the Army anyway, then you are not a conscientious objector. But if your beliefs were maybe based on something prior to the Army and then developed and then crystallized throughout the course of your service, then your beliefs can be considered.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
You know, in just a moment, we're going to watch a Skype video of Josh Stieber, who also served in Iraq, he also United States Army, who filed for conscientious objector status, but he became a 1-0, as you will hear in just a moment. So let's just take a moment and we'll watch that. One of the things that
maybe give this a try.
Yeah. One of the things we'd like to let our viewers know is the processes that you went through as a recent veteran with service in Iraq to file for conscientious objection. And there's a couple of questions I want to ask you, because I know that the Army Regulation 600-43 is the one that covers conscientious objection. You probably had to become pretty familiar with that. One of the things that we would like our viewers to know is, did you file for the 1-0 conscientious objector status, or as a conscientious objector 1AO, where you'd be reassigned non-combatant training duties?
I went with the first option to get out altogether. I was in the infantry, so had the option to be reassigned.
I know that you had to describe in very good detail how your beliefs changed or developed, and provide the explanation for what factors, the how, the when, the from whom, and what source, the training you received, your belief that were acquired, that caused you to change in the development of your conscientious objection beliefs. Could you share that with us?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a very, very detailed question. So the one I spent probably the most time thinking over and writing about. Um, so yeah, in terms of my upbringing and my training and belief, I I grew up in a very religious community, a kind of right-wing evangelical church, and the school that I went to was run by the church. So I was pretty much hearing the same perspective on things 6 or 7 days a week. Um, and they took the war and a lot of different political ideas and connected them to religion. So all the rhetoric that was used to sell the war to, the general public of, doing all this great stuff for Iraq and protecting people in this country, that was attached to different religious ideals like being willing to sacrifice your life and being willing to show love, and just a lot of very kind of selective spiritual ideas were attached to the cause of the war, and I didn't really spend much time questioning that. I accepted it, and I wanted to do something positive. And after hearing these things all throughout high school, I felt like I didn't have much of a choice but to enlist right after I graduated, because I was convinced at the time that it would be doing a lot of positive things. Um,
That
so
was
I,
just right after 9/11 too, was it not?
um, no, I was in middle school when 9/11 happened, and
Oh, okay, I forgot.
yeah, but I grew up in DC, and that definitely, left an imprint for me to go down and see the big hole in the Pentagon, and um, definitely contributed to a sense of wanting to make sure something like that didn't happen again. But no, I enlisted in the summer of 2006, and so from there, once I entered training, then I started to see that things weren't as black and white as they'd been presented to be in high school, and so my thinking definitely started to get challenged as we would go through training, and just saw the bar lowered more and more of going from all these high-minded ideals of what the war was supposed to be about, and then even in training started to hear even joking or a celebration of a loss of life through videos that we would watch, or cadences that joked about killing women and children and things of that nature. And so the bar started to be lowered, and for a while I would just make excuses and say, okay, maybe this is what some people have to do to get into the right mindset to be able to kill if the occasion would ask for it. So I kept going with things, and even though I saw a lot of things that contradicted the beliefs that I had grown up with, I kept going with things until I got to Iraq and finally experienced enough things there where I got to the point where I had to stop making excuses. There were just too many contradictions between what we were doing on a regular basis, and the kind of behavior that we were participating in, and the kind of person that I wanted to be. And I got to the point where I said, I can't keep going with this. There's too many contradictions here.
You had to explain how your beliefs became incompatible with military service and why. What did you share at the time, and how was it accepted?
As we were in Iraq, the justification for violence seemed to only make things worse. So the situation that I was in was I deployed in the surge in early 2007, and was sent to the outskirts of Baghdad. And so with my company, we moved into a factory on the outskirts of town. And one of those contradictions I saw happen then, we said that we were going to Iraq to bring freedom and democracy, and the idea of democracy is the will of the people. And so as we were moving into this part of Baghdad, the whole district came out, men, women, and children, and held signs and flags and banners and peacefully protested against us being in their neighborhood. And we ignored that, and we pushed our way through, and we established ourselves in this factory. And so they had tried telling us, peacefully that they didn't want us there. We pushed them aside, established ourselves, and then they started trying to tell us with violence that they didn't want us around. So as they would start to use violence, we would respond with more violence, and things kept escalating and getting more and more intense. And so one of the things that I spent a decent amount of time writing about, and obviously contributed a lot to my thought process, was when we were going through this cycle of increasing violence. Our battalion commander said that the way that we were going to put a stop to it, to keep the local population from planting roadside bombs. That's mostly what we were getting hit with, was that if a roadside bomb went off, then we were entitled to open fire on anybody who happened to be in the area. And this guy explained that if we did that, then it would intimidate people, and the people who were laying the bombs would be pressured by the local population to not do it anymore, because the local population would be afraid of our vengeance. And I thought that was, clearly wrong, and I lost my job for not following that order when I was in Iraq, and for challenging my leadership on that count. So I mentioned that in my application, but when I was turning it in, my company commander said that unless I listed specific names and places where that happened, I couldn't keep it in. And I tried to tell him that, it was this colonel, one of his superiors, who issued this order. And, after seeing what happened at Abu Ghraib, or all these different scandals, I was tired of seeing, the people at the low end of the military hierarchy getting blamed for everything when it goes much higher. So my captain was looking for one or two people he could put everything on, and I was trying to say no, this was coming down from much higher, and he wouldn't have any of that. So he said that I had to take that out, or he wouldn't turn the paperwork in. So that was a part of the process that I really had to struggle through. But yeah, that was definitely one of the defining moments for me, where it went from all this idealism that I had enlisted for, to really seeing that we would lower the bar that low, to be willing to hurt or even kill innocent civilians if that's what it took to make it home alive. So that was the violence, and just went against so much of what I believed in, and strategically, I think, also made things a lot worse. But then at the same time, I started to see us actually begin to negotiate with people who had been attacking us. And so I had kind of, gone along with the rhetoric that the president said about a lot of different things, including when he said, that you can't negotiate with terrorists. But we actually started doing that. We negotiated with this guy that we had arrested a few months before for being part of a bomb ring. And we were going to send him to prison until we found out that he was the mayor of the district that we were living in. So instead of sending him to prison, we negotiated with him. So pretty much all these assumptions that I had about violence and about negotiation just got completely turned on their head. And that led a lot to my reevaluation of things. So yeah, as I mentioned, I grew up very religiously and was trying to reconcile these different ideas of Christianity to what we had done in Iraq, and then to what I thought the right answer was. And a lot of that change was going back and reading the accounts of Christ and how he acted, and it wasn't of trying to change things through force or through violence, but it was through sacrificial love. And so for me, it got to the point where I had to say, either I'm going to put my faith in essentially doing whatever it takes to maintain my own safety and my own security, or I'm going to say that no, I actually take this guy seriously who ended up dying on a cross and not defending himself because he said that there were things higher than your own material life. So that's how I saw things. But I also said, and you know, still believe that it's much easier to say that than to do that.
As you have heard, his position came from growing up in a very religious family, as he said, a very right-wing evangelical family, and then his service in Iraq totally started weighing on his background type of thing, and then he filed for it and became a conscientious objector. So we have two people that are on this program that received a conscientious objector status.
Well,
Glen.
actually, it's three, because Nicole and Josh in the military, and I was regarding the draft back
That's
in
right.
72, in 1972. So, yeah.
Tell us about the process that you went through. Glen.
Well, it was the usual draft regulation process. The criteria for CO, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, really are the same, whether you're in the military or facing the draft. Procedures, of course, are different, and mine was rather uneventful. And regarding the draft, at that time, under those regulations, which have since changed in the early 80s, but at that time, an interview was not necessary, and they granted my conscientious objector status, reclassification as 1O, just based on the paperwork I'd submitted, which was extensive. I was attending a theological seminary, so I had a 2D draft classification. If I had finished that several more years, I could have been an ordained minister with a 4D classification. And the fact that I gave that up, even though my draft lottery number was 5 out of 366, which means that my birthday had already passed by the time I gave up my 2D, they probably could infer some sincerity about that, because if I wanted to just beat the draft, I could have just hung out in the theological seminary for a few more years. Anyway, so they granted that, and the essay that I had submitted was about 50 pages of stuff with a bunch of supporting information, and it was pretty solid.
And that
so mine was pretty uneventful.
That application went to the local draft
Yeah,
board.
it was just the local draft board thing, yeah, and they granted it right away, so I didn't need to go through the appeals process. There's a pretty extensive appeals process.
Now, was that the draft board in
There's
Everett,
yeah,
Washington?
down underneath the Burnett's jewelry store basement, that big office they had down there. So someplace my stuff was in one of those file cabinets. But one of the important things, I think, for people, whether they're in the military or facing the draft, is that the government doesn't let you be a conscientious objector. What we're trying to do is get the government to recognize that we have figured that out for ourselves. So we reach that conclusion, and we declare ourselves to be conscientious objectors, and then it's the matter of getting the government to recognize what we already know in our hearts.
Absolutely,
And
I agree with you on that.
So it's very much a sense of empowerment for the people and not being jerked around by the system. So I think that's an important thing to put out. And you talked about the timing, that if you actually had those beliefs and you were a CEO before you were enlisted, well, then you just made a bad decision. You were like a stupid consumer who bought something without checking it out. You
Well,
bought
matter
a
of
car
fact,
without knowing
Army-
the car was falling apart.
Army
Zero
Regulation
Teflon.
600-43, which guides the whole process, disallows conscientious objector status if that was the case.
Exactly, yeah, and it's sort of like they blame you for being a bad consumer, when in fact what they do is they refuse to tell you in advance about conscientious objector. I mean, when they recruit, they're trying to get you to sign up, and they don't say, by the way, you may find that you have beliefs that make this incompatible. Before you sign up, you should make sure that you're willing to actually kill people and stuff. They don't, it's not like they tell you in advance all the stuff, and then, but if but they want to catch you afterwards and hold you accountable. I think what would be fair would be if we were, as a society, to presume that of course we don't want to kill other people. Of course a human being should recognize that other lives are valuable and we aren't going to kill them. And I think that my own belief is that people should not be allowed to join the military unless they've gone through that very kind of soul-searching in terms of their religious beliefs or their spiritual beliefs or whatever, and after extensive grappling find, okay, I guess I can kill people, now I'm eligible to join the military. So I think the burden of proof should be exactly the other way around. That's my opinion, my belief. It's important, I think, that people take accountability for their own beliefs, their own, what's in your heart. And it's not a head thing. It's not like, oh, I have this theory now. You know, it's not a head thing. There may be mental stuff going on with it, like I have new understandings of things, I see things differently, but a lot of it is in your heart, and you express that too, where you just, you know, you could not dehumanize that target. And other people, I've helped some people get out of the military as conscientious objectors, and they sometimes have a hard time articulating what it is, but they just know in their hearts they just can't do that. It's just wrong. And then sometimes it's hard for them to figure out exactly why it is. And in many cases, especially in the last couple of decades, people don't as much have a conventional religious upbringing as people did during the 70s, for example, when people could say, well, I was raised Methodist, or I was raised Catholic, or I was raised Jewish, or whatever, and I have these core beliefs to draw from and expand upon and apply toward this. A lot of people don't have that, and they have to figure out, what is this? And I've talked to some people who have some pretty unconventional religious or spiritual beliefs, and they're very often not articulated well. And one of the nice things in the regulation, you know, this couple dozen pages of regulation, is that the regulation acknowledges that people may have a hard time articulating what those beliefs are, and you should not hold that against them in the process. So I thought there were some parts of the regulation that actually showed some compassion, some understanding for that reality, because that's very much a reality. So this goes way beyond what you had said at the outset of the interview about how initially it was assumed that people from the historic peace churches, you know, Quakers, Mennonites, and Brethren, would have an edge. And now there's so many things.
Well, the reason I sort of chuckled at the Everett Draft Board was I grew up within a denomination that has chaplains in the military service. And so when I started investigating at that time, and that was 66, conscientious objection, because I took very seriously the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And then they says, your own denomination has chaplains in the military service. And at the time, I was just a young, you know, person, couldn't come back with an answer.
Right, and the regulation says that's not a barrier. It's not what your church or your religious body believes, it's what you as a person believe.
The reverse of that is also true.
Yes.
If you have a church or any other kind of religious group that does say that, you know, and absolutely puts into practice, you know, these beliefs, essentially they're looking for somebody who is a pacifist, absolutely a pacifist, to qualify for conscientious objection. But even if they share those beliefs, that is also not grounds to automatically say this person has them.
You cannot say, I belong to, quote, a historic peace church, Quakers, Mennonites, Brethren, and therefore I should be.
Nope. Yeah, it comes down to the individual, and those hypotheticals that they, like what they put to you, like what happens if, you know, somebody were attacking your mother or something like this, those are not allowed because that's not war. That's another setting that's not war, and that's an illegal question. And they do that all the time.
We have just about 2 minutes left. It's been going by very quickly.
Yes.
Nicole, I'd like you to address our young veterans or active duty who might be watching right now. What would you tell them as a result of your experience?
I guess particularly to somebody who may be considering conscientious objection, I notice a lot of people like to go AWOL before they do so, their pending deployment or whatever. I hope that having shared my story and gone through the process in country shows them that they don't really need to do that if they need to make a claim. Because as soon as you go AWOL, they can ignore your claim. They don't have to process it anymore because they can kick you out of the Army some other way and they'll just put you in jail. So if you really want to make a claim for conscientious objection, stick with it. It's going to be really hard, and you're going to get a lot of flack from other soldiers in your unit, but that in itself helps you prove your sincerity. If you can stay strong and be calm and not be mad at people for what they do, they feel betrayed, and really you're being more loyal, and they will see that if you just stick through it.
Great. Glenn, what would you share with our
Well,
audience?
I want people to grapple with their own beliefs, recognize you're not the only one, and there is the GI Rights hotline.
Yes.
It's toll-free 877-447-4487, and you can also go to the website girightshotline.org. And there are people there who know how the system works, and they can help you through it no matter what you're in, what's going on. They can help out. And so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of people who've gone before you and people who are on your side.
I want to thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Nicole. We have a local resource, too, just off of exit 122, Coffee Strong, which is a GI Rights oriented pro-soldier but anti-war coffee house, and they have GI Rights information as well as other type of things, and people that will hear you and refer you on to activities. We want to thank our viewing audience. This has been a different conversation for Veterans for Peace, but peace is really what's behind our name, and conscientious objection is totally one of those things. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah, been fun.
Soldiers speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their future.